Okay. All right. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Kevin Conroy, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately just because this is going to be undoubtedly a pretty sad stream, a bit of a bummer and stuff like that. I'll let YouTube's algorithms connect or whatever for a second and people trickle in for a moment before I really get into it. But it is a good chance for me to make sure everything's working and it's all looking pretty good. Um, oh yeah, okay. YouTube does seem to be clicking in already, so that's good. I got this open if I choose to need it, and by this I mean his Wikipedia page. Just if I don't know if we need to look anything up, I guess. Why is lighting so weirdly one directional? What is that? Should be bright enough. Like, okay. Is that better? Well, that's a lot better. Okay. And it's still weird when I'm here. It seems to be darkening itself because of me, but I don't know. Maybe I can tweak that a little bit. That looks a little better. Okay, great. So, unfortunately, last week we did get the pretty tragic news that Kevin Conroy died after um, what we were told was a short bout with cancer. Like he didn't really tell anyone he was ill, but that's what I think his publicist released. I believe I was reading from the thing. It says here on Wikipedia it was intestinal cancer, and yeah, so he passed away November 10th. We talked about it a little bit in the context of Wakanda Forever because that movie came out literally the next day, and for a lot of us, Chadwick Boseman's death and Kevin Conroy's death kind of hung in the air around this story. It is pretty tragic because Kevin Conroy was only 66, and not that it would be any less tragic if he was 76, but it would certainly have been less surprising. 66 is quite young for anybody to pass away, um, and I believe he's survived by his husband, but I don't really know. That dude isn't really in the public eye, but yeah, so it was tragic stuff, and it's led to a lot of memorial comics and such, some of which I found really touching, and I included one in the slide that's going by here. It's the only one in color. I don't know who it's by, unfortunately. I wish I did. I found it on Reddit when I first saw it, and then I managed to find it again through a Google search. Ooh, it occurs to me there's slurs going by in the comic, but we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. It's context relevant, so I don't think it's that big a deal, but interesting for YouTube's purpose, but whatever, I'm not going to say him. So yeah, it's this comic right here, and it says why not. So maybe that group's responsible for it. Hopefully attribution can come out there, but I don't really know the story behind that colored book, but I found it really touching because it's just a short single page story about Batman losing his voice, and it works really well as a little tribute to Kevin Conroy. What I found more touching, though, was something that's been shared around a little bit since his death, and I think really speaks to the kind of person he was and why he was able to bring a certain life to Batman that few other performers have. And we'll talk a bit more about that, and I think why he was so influential on people for so long, even though, he's mostly known for being Batman in an animated series from the 90s. In theory, I think if he were if he were a more standard voice actor or take on Batman, that performance would probably be forgotten by now, and we'd probably be more focused on something like Michael Keaton's performance, or maybe even that guy who played Jim Gordon in Gotham voiced Batman in a couple of movies. I know. I'm not sure if it was Nolan North who took over some of the video game roles for Batman, but there are others out there, is my point. But Kevin Conroy really stands out, and he kind of, a couple of years ago, wrote this short comic that is flashing by here, and that's the majority of what we're talking about today, called Finding Batman. That was part of DC's Pride comic, and I think a lot of people didn't really know that Kevin was gay and had a husband, and for a very long time, basically right up to leading to his time cast as Batman in the 90s, he faced a lot of discrimination, and this book that's coming by is pretty vicious in that regard. It's definitely worth reading, but if you are easily upset by like homophobia, if that's a rough topic for you, which for some people they have good reason for it to be, I don't recommend you read this book. But for everyone else, I definitely do, because it's a powerful piece about Kevin. It's not about Batman, although it is extreme. Batman's very relevant and kind of the ending of the story, but it's mostly about the life of this struggling actor, trying to take care of his brother and what's going on with him, facing like just open bigotry in Hollywood from back in that time, and just being told the most awful things by these producers, and just facing so much hurtful behavior. And this wave of palatable relief I felt when he started talking to these guys at Warner Brothers or DC or whoever he was talking to about taking on this role of Batman. And at first he's not sure, because they're talking about, this guy who's lost his parents and how they're kind of taking a different look at the character from what Kevin Conroy probably knew of him from his days as from Batman's Adam West days and stuff, and how they were taking a pretty different shift in tone with the character towards something more along the lines of the 1989 Tim Burton movie, which maybe he saw, but it isn't super clear from the book. But the point being, he wasn't sure at first, and they're talking him through the character. They think he would be, well, they ask if he thinks he would be good for this role, and he said he'd think about it. And then he starts to identify with what Batman's experience was, and how he lost his father on in a medical bed, on his deathbed, and watching him struggle, and it's just, and so he connects with this character, and it ends up fueling his performance for him for the rest of his life, basically. And I found it all very powerful. I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's because I'm speaking from my emotional reaction for it. Zach Tapp, thanks for joining us for this chat. So it's all just to say that it's tragic that he's gone. I'm grateful that this is the Batman that I was introduced to growing up, and for a lot of people it will be the same. And that's the cool thing is, with the era of streaming and stuff like that, the Batman of the 90s doesn't have to stay exclusive to that era. And I don't doubt that some kids out there with an HBO Max, and their parents have an HBO Max subscription, are going to find these cartoons and connect with it. And there's something very beautiful about all that. Even if they don't, one way or another, they're going to see a Batman performance influenced by Kevin Conroy's take on the character. And there's something very moving about all of that, as tragic as everything else is. And so I take a lot of comfort in that. I know for the Wakanda thing, I got pretty sappy at the end of the stream, and I kind of expect that's just going to continue for this one all the way through. But like I said at the end of the Wakanda stream, though, it's okay to feel sad. And the ending of this book is kind of beautiful, because it reminds me so much of that moment when Batman, I guess Bruce Wayne sees a bat and says, yes, father, I shall become a bat. It's a big famous moment now. And Kevin Conroy kind of has that realization of, this is terrain I have walked in, and I can embrace this darkness and find solace in something more positive and become Batman and stuff. And I found it so beautiful. It really, it's fascinating, just because Conroy was never a writer, and I did have the chance to interview him once, and he'd probably be the first to tell you that. He's pretty quick to credit the creative staff behind the scenes and stuff. what he really was doing is just bringing a performance to it. But I gotta tell you, this book was well written and very beautiful. And I keep glancing at the dialogue as it's going by on the slideshow, um, just to remind myself of some of the little moments. And really, he's a good example. Like, so, it any pretty much whatever he would have made for this book, I wouldn't have a lot of negative things to say about it because, again, he's not a writer. We're here to talk about this performer and kind of give reverence to him. So if this book merited criticism or something like that, I'd probably be pulling punches or whatever. But I actually, like, taking all of the grief and sadness of Kevin Conroy aside, I'm actually very impressed with the book and, well, the book I say, but this little 8-page story that he did pretty much, or however long. He makes use of every little panel very effectively, better than a lot of other professional full-time comic book writers out of there, and that aspect of it I find fascinating, and it just really speaks to his credit. He's worth checking out a little bit more. And so voice acting is kind of what he was best known for, but he is interesting as, like, beyond that a little bit. And he did have, like, a career on stage and stuff like that, more so in the 80s, but I always found it really interesting that if you look at his career, once he started playing Batman, he never really stopped. And I thought even about us maybe like looking at something like Multiverses, because that is his voice. And it is interesting that he has a legacy as recently as a game that like just came out. I don't believe, and I was checking because I don't think he's the voice of Batman in Gotham Knights, but it's him in Arkham Knight. It's him in Arkham City. It's him in Arkham Asylum. It's him in Batman the Animated Series, in Justice League, in so many of those crossover series like Static Shock I'm seeing here, Batman Beyond, which people don't talk about a lot, but I think that's so cool that he just altered his voice slightly and all of a sudden he was playing an older Bruce Wayne, and it's still the same voice and has that sense of continuity across all these series. He's a really cool performer and definitely worth like talking about, but also just remembering as like one of the greats. He really is on the level of like Mark Hamill's Joker and stuff in terms of performative strength, and I will always respect that. So I don't know if I have a lot else to say. I did. You definitely should read this comic. DC Infinite or whatever their online comic book service is released it for free, and I don't know much about it because it's not for non-Americans, so as a Canadian I've never had access to that thing, but I found a link to this blog post on Tumblr or something that has the comic for international readers, if you aren't able to read it the way it's been like commonly reposted on most news articles I've seen. So check out the video description if you want to read the book for yourself, because it is moving, sincere, and beautiful. I don't know if I have a ton else to say, so if people have questions or whatever, let me know. Otherwise, it was touching to see all the tributes that came out. The ones that most affected me, or at least I found most touching, was like the voice actor for Poison Ivy, I think, was the one who kind of broke the news of Kevin Conroy's death. Wonder Woman's actors, voice actor, spoke out. Tara Strong said something. Paul Dini, who created the Batman animated series, or is one of the main voices, and maybe even is one of the people being referenced like in this Kevin Conroy book. They all had really touching stuff to say. It's interesting too that he was more on Twitter. I gotta say, I'm not really gonna be active on Twitter much more at this point. I just do not trust that app with my IP at the moment when you cut so many people in your security staff. So I haven't been on there, but I assume it's a pretty morose mood, and it's a pretty sad thing to think about. it's going to happen. I don't know how else to say that. I don't mean to be glib about it either. It's sad, but it is just this tragic inevitability that more and more we're going to see, like us losing Batman performers here and there, and I don't know if any of them are going to quite hurt as much as this one. Like Adam West definitely has his place in Batman history, and I love him to bits and stuff, but no one really quite delivered like Kevin Conroy. I think a lot about those animated series moments, and also even just how he set the tone for Batman going forward in a lot of ways. Hey, Darkseid, thanks for joining us. It's a regular person in chat, but yeah, he really was able to bring something to life to that, and it's hinted at in this books, but like he outright said it in like this New York Times article that he was uh, like working in theater as a gay man in New York on Broadway while the AIDS epidemic was happening in the 80s. And he has this quote: he went to so many funerals that he felt a sense of obligation um, to like play this character secretly living with AIDS in this Eastern Standard performance that he did. And so he had that life for a time, but you look at his career and it's not someone that was getting roles left and right, and you can see where the struggle was and how he like had trouble finding a permanent role before Batman, and it almost certainly was because of this discrimination that he's outright talking about in this comic here, and it's really tough to see all of that. He actually, it seems like, was like losing out on parts at some point in the 90s, so it actually got kind of worse for him when it was a little bit less. Maybe he was just less out in the 80s or something like that, or there were just better roles for him at the time. But I just find it really interesting looking at his filmography and seeing that sudden transition to Batman in the absence of a ton of like him taking on a ton of other roles. I think he really just saw meaning in this role as a superhero, and I thought about that when I was putting together this stream of how easy it is for people to be dismissive of these kind of stories. But it's, and it also represented a steady paycheck for him and stuff, but I think it was more apparent than that. It must have been fascinating for him to go from like seeing kids being fans of him and being excited about his voice to gradually them growing up until generations of people were suddenly looking up to him as Batman and being inspired by him. And I really hope that he took solace in the fact that in his lifetime gay marriage was legalized in the US, and hopefully it stays that way. But either way, I think that the Pandora's box is opened in terms of acceptance and stuff like that, and a lot of those kids that he see probably wouldn't care that he was gay one way or another. He didn't talk about that much in the world of Batman and in the realm of those conversations. It was more of something that came up in like news articles and interviews along those lines where that specific line of questioning was brought up, and I think that makes sense just given the nature of wanting to make promotion around a video game or an animated project about said animated project rather than about one of the stars. But and so I kind of applaud him for pseudo keeping it a little bit separate from his performance of Batman in that regard, but he never shied away from who he was or how this role inspired him, and I think it really is spelt out in this book, which I think is fascinating. I think it's just such a fascinating take that all of these people who look up to Batman and who view him in this way, like most people would call him one of the best performing Batmans, and the fact that he's gay is incidental to that. It didn't mean that Batman had to be gay because he was playing him, because that's not really the character as historically presented. But there's no reason why like the sexuality of his voice actor should matter at all, and it never really did, which is something really nice about Batman's character history and stuff like that. So that's the story of Kevin Conroy, really. You know, you could talk a lot about Batman and bring it to life and stuff, but what I really am taken by is this struggle and the discrimination he faced, I guess, but also just like how all of that transformed into such a powerful role and really informed it from the beginning. And it's why he took the role. It's why he embraced it and kind of like just kept coming back. Kept coming back as Batman pretty much at any opportunity he could, and it all just feels so right to me. So yeah, I like I said, I don't really have much more to say to that. I think it's just worth taking a moment to talk about him and how important he was to so many people and why that is and how that all came to be. It really is fascinating, and because the book is free and online, I do kind of just feel it mostly speaks for itself, and you should check it out. In terms of other stuff, if you aren't familiar with Kevin Conroy's time as a Batman, I'd probably start with the animated film called Mask of the Phantasm, one of the better Batman films ever made, full stop. The fact that it is animated is just an interesting detail to it. And beyond that, the animated series itself, which that film was kind of spawned out of, is just as good, and pretty much any episode is worth watching. He even really shines in stuff like Justice League, the animated series from the 90s and stuff. And then, of course, the Arkham trilogy. It's so cool that he got to be the voice of Batman in 3 of the best Batman video games ever made, and that's him through and through. It's not him in Arkham Origins. He actually personally corrected me on that once when I knew that, and I still slipped it and said, oh, in the Arkham series, and he did correct me that he's not Batman in every Arkham game, but given the events of Arkham Knight, it really feels like that take on the character is now closed out permanently. And given where Rocksteady's going with the Suicide Squad film and with Gotham Knights out now, that definitely seems to be the case for a while. So it's tragic. It's always going to be tragic, but it makes me think of the fact that you have people like Will Arnett there, who plays Batman in the Lego Batman movie, and presumably if they do a sequel, will do so again. And he clearly was inspired by Kevin Conroy. You have people like that guy who played him in the Dark Knight Returns movies, I think. Oh no, in Batman Year One is what I'm thinking of, and he plays Jim Gordon in Gotham. I forget his name, but he does a pretty good Batman too. So it's not like it's the end of the world for these things, and I don't want it to just be like, oh, it'll be fine or whatever. It's sad. It's unambiguously tragic and sad, don't get me wrong, but there is a sense of hope for all this, I feel. That this sense of, he inspired not just a Batman voice actor to be his sole successor, like something on Doctor Who or whatever. He inspired several Batman actors who are all kind of playing this character simultaneously in different iterations and stuff. And that legacy living on, that performance living on in a lot of ways through people like the Arkham Origins guy and stuff like that, I take some solace in that too, and I think it's going to stay that way for a long time. So, in life I don't know what the purpose of life is. I don't. I think we all kind of have our own goals, or should set our own goals for what meaning we take out of the brief moment of time we are allotted on this earth. But I definitely relate a lot to someone like Kevin Conroy and think he succeeded in a certain way in what my goal has always been, and it's just to leave this lasting mark of ideas and influence on people. I don't really believe much in the concept of like having children leaving a legacy forward, because you're kind of just pushing your genes out the door and being forgotten. Because I don't know who my great-great-grandfather is. I don't know. I couldn't tell you a single one of my ancestors. Some people know that, and some people are lucky enough to have a properly kept family tree, but thanks to World War II, Like many people, that's never going to be the case with me. And even then, these people that have this family tree, like I know I've met like this guy who once knew his family tree going back like 400 years because he is part of this Scottish line, and it's really cool. But that's also only 400 years. It goes farther back for him. So I've always felt like if you want to leave a legacy on the world or an impact, it's your better bet is stories or something like that, because even if you are ultimately forgotten as an author, even if you influence like only some people, like their ideas spread and your knowledge and thoughts can exist beyond you or something. And that's always kind of been a personal goal of mine. So I really relate to that idea of Kevin Conroy being able to set up this legacy in Batman and creating a voice for him that didn't exist before, and kind of will continue to exist going forward. And it's definitely going to be a certain archetype that a lot of voice actors are going to model their own performance after. Even people casting for Batman are probably going to think a lot about Kevin Conroy's voice when they're picking it, like a new performer and stuff like that. And the legacy lives on, and I find something so beautiful in that. I don't know if there's a better way to remember Kevin Conroy or for a human being to leave a legacy. So that's wonderful, because Batman is an archetype and represents a certain something in the human need to like scream out for justice and not just like advocate for it, but fight for it, put everything on the line for it and stuff like that. And so I think that's why Batman has existed as this enduring legacy, and why Kevin Conroy, in giving that voice for justice, a voice a voice that most people, I think, imagine in their head when they're reading a Batman comic, or like some sort of like, well, I guess, yeah, mostly in that scenario. And I think that's important. And I think that's a really worthwhile legacy to leave the human race. That is something. Like I was kind of alluding to earlier, like people look down on these superhero stories, but they can be so impactful and so artistic. The Batman of this year, that movie is a good example of that. Where, you know, it might not be a perfect movie or whatever, but it I'd be hard pressed for like, or I'd push back heavily against people who would say it like has no artistic merit, because it's a really well made film and has a lot of interesting ideas to it. So yeah, it's so easy to be dismissive, but you look at something like this and the life of Kevin Conroy, and I really struggle to relate to people who just think that these stories are for kids only and can't mean anything to adults. No, like you gotta show them this book if you ever encounter someone like that, because they're just flat out wrong at a certain point. And you know, if a person doesn't connect with every superhero story or whatever, that's another matter entirely. But to hand wave it all away as nothing is to deny this man his reality and life story and life experience, and you're just wrong in that regard. And I know I'm not speaking to anyone in the audience here, I'm preaching to the choir in that regard, but there are people out there that really just think these superhero stories are nothing, and they are wrong, because you read something like this and it was everything to Kevin Conroy. And look at it, if you look at his filmography, that's exactly the case. That's entirely how he came to define his life at a certain point in time. And I just find it all so wonderful. So yeah, Tevye, thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, I am kind of wrapping up, I feel. So hopefully you and anyone else who's watching this after the fact enjoyed the stream. Thanks for watching, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Yeah, I feel like I'm ending on a bit of a like down note, but you know, it was never not going to be the case with this guy. So rest in peace, Kevin Conroy. I'll never forget you.